present. Alright, let's go.
Ladies first?
No, not this time, please.
Alright, I'll go.
Okay, I'll get this later.
Alright, you guys got the time?
It has timer on here.
Alright, that works. Okay. Alright, today's society.
Hold on, sorry.
What?
Do we get a coffee?
Not today.
Not today. Friday.
Oh, okay.
Alright,
Sorry.
okay. Today's society values fact in its purest form far more than it does myth, fiction, and story. Fact to some appears to be somewhat of a currency of knowledge. Fact can be cut and isolated, while myth and creative story cannot. Before looking at each in a deeper way, we must first define what each is. The definition of truth is the true or actual state of a matter. In comparison, the definition of myth is an invented story, idea, or concept. Now let's contrast the two. Both of the two are types of information. Myth is simply a step from truth. It fundamentally is based on truth, so if we look at any myth, we can scrape up some amount of truth, whether it is on the surface or contained deep within the text. Without truth, myth cannot exist. Myth is completely reliant on a base of truth. If not, we would perceive it as nothing at all. Socrates says in his discussions that in a perfectly just city, myths, epics, and poems should be censored from the people, and more importantly, from the children. Socrates' censorship of myth is ultimately the wrong way of dealing with myth. The first reason he is wrong is that he does not realize that myth and fiction are essential to our existence and understanding as mortal human beings. Second of all, is that epic and myth, such as the Iliad, contain valuable and obvious truth that can be easily extracted from the text. The last reason Socrates is ultimately wrong is the example of Jesus' method of teaching and our relationship with God. Both were founded on a mythical and imaginative basis. Socrates, in devising his way to construct and govern an ideal city, says that mythical writings and the like should be blocked from the eyes of citizens. Socrates argues that myth is an imitation of truth, and, as it seems, it is due to this that it produces everything because it lays hold of a certain small part of each thing, and that part in itself is only a phantom. From Socrates' point of view, myth is far from the truth, simply because it is not truth. He is saying myth is only imitation. However, he does also admit that there is a small part of truth inside of mythical things. Additionally, Socrates states that they do not recognize that these words are third from what it is, and are easy to make for the man who doesn't know the truth. For such a man makes what looks like beings, but are not. When Socrates states that something is indeed third from the truth, he means basically that it is 3 steps from the truth. The idea of a chair, Socrates acknowledges as the first truth. The second truth is the physical representation of a chair, something a carpenter might make, what we can feel, see, and touch. The third from the truth is an imitation of the physical representation of an idea. This is what he believes myth is. Socrates believes that it is easy for myth to deceive those who have never known the truth. This is because myth, or imitation as he calls it, is third from the truth. Therefore it is close to truth, and appears to be truth, but is not, and this makes it easily misinterpreted. Socrates discusses this proposition with his friend Glaucon for many pages in the book. He finally comes to a concluding statement when he says, "Therefore, with respect to beauty and badness, the imitator will neither know nor opine rightly about what he imitates." He also says, "The imitator knows nothing worth mentioning about what he imitates. Imitation is a kind of play and not serious." These final words on imitation show that Socrates is convinced that nothing good can come of myth. Regardless of how much truth is present, it still is not even close to the actual truth of the matter. This is Socrates' belief. Myth is of no good to man. Therefore, in a truly just city, it can do no good and should thus be censored from the eyes of the people. The first reason Socrates is ultimately wrong in his proposition that myth and epic should be censored is that myth and creativity is our human way of attempting to reflect the glory and essence of God. J.R.R. Tolkien, a great writer of fiction, believes that myth and storytelling is something essential to the human race. In his short writing, Mythopoeia, he says the following: "Yes, wish fulfillment dreams we spin, to cheat our timid hearts, an ugly fact defeat. Whence came the wish, and whence the power to dream, or some things fair, and others ugly deem?" In this passage, Tolkien is hinting at the idea that we nowadays attempt to shut out dreams and imagination. However, he says that plain fact is the real problem. He refers to fact as an ugly thing. Fact itself can be a good thing, but fact itself is like a framework of a building or an undecorated house. Sure, it's practical, but is it beautiful? This is what Tolkien is getting at. He thinks myth is a decoration of fact. Also, he says in a later part of this passage, "Whence came the wish, and whence the power to dream, or some things fair and others ugly deem?" When Tolkien says this, he is asking the question, where did our desire, or power as he calls it, to dream and imagine come from? This is a rhetorical question, because it is so obviously answered. Before the fall, when Adam was first created, God set the animals before him and instructed him to name them. The only way in which Adam could have done this is through creativity. He did not know the truth of the animals. He gave them names based on creativity. Adam did this with Eve as well. When God set her before him, he gave her a name that he understood, something that he created himself. Therefore, our human power to create was given to us by God, not our sinful nature. Thus, it is not an evil thing. Tolkien says later in his writing Mythopoeia, "In paradise, perchance the eye may stray from gazing upon everlasting day, to see the day illume and renew, from mirrored truth the likeness of the true." Here again, Tolkien displays how man can look at God, and from his truth can mirror it in the best way possible for others to comprehend. The second reason to disregard Socrates' thoughts on myth is that the Iliad contains a significant amount of truth about both the life and culture of the time period it was written in. The epic and myth written by Homer, the Iliad, holds the majority of truth known today about the Trojan War. Without Homer's writing, we would not even know that the city of Troy actually ever existed. A lot of people read the Iliad and walk away from it thinking about how much violence is spread throughout it. As well, many note the views on women displayed by the work. Both of these concepts, violence and the insignificance of women, are accurate according to other works written about in this time period. The idea that war is violent is widely recognized by most sound people. Here is a truth that is easily drawn from the text. It is something that cannot be misunderstood. It is evident, and therefore it does not follow Socrates' view that myth, if taken wrongly, will be taken wrong by ignorant men. The idea that women are below men is as well not far from the truth at all. Men during those times believed women were cursed men sent by the gods. This is another area where the text displays truth about the culture it was written in. The idea that women are possessions in this text is of course morally wrong. As well, the text is written in such a way as to make fighting over women as if they were possessions a pointless and pathetic thing. Thus, the truth of the text is clear and evident. This is one case which Socrates is right about myth. Myth must be taken in the correct way, not misinterpreted. If someone were to read the Iliad and draw the wrong truth, it would be a scenario when myth is a bad thing. This is why it is important that myth is written in such a way that it is decipherable. The last reason that Socrates believes wrong thoughts about myth is proven strictly by the Bible, which should be the most important text to us as Christians. When Jesus came to earth in human form, he used a form of myth to teach the ignorant people about God. Parables. These parables were short, usually hypothetical, and almost always included everyday scenarios known by the people he was speaking to. The parables always expressed a greater truth within. Doesn't this sound like myth? Something used to communicate truth through a story? One of Jesus' parables is the slaves and their master. In the parable, each slave is given an amount of money by the master, and each slave does something with it, except for the last one, who buries it. When the master asks for the money back, the slave that did nothing to expand his gift is punished. This parable was used by Jesus to display how God expects us to use our gifts that we have been given for his glory, and not just over them. Jesus understands the people better than they understand themselves. He knows that the best way to communicate this idea to them is through a story, a myth. Jesus also uses the pictures like the one of him being the vine and God the vine dresser. Also, God is the potter and us the clay. Pottery making and farming were two common actions for the people of that time. These myths used to communicate truth are effective in the way Jesus presents them. In our relationship with God, we, as finite humans, mortals, can never truly understand his glory and essence. Through imagination, myth, we can better know God. This is why God appeared as a burning bush to Moses. He could not understand God's full glory. If he saw it, he would die. Jesus knows that we can never understand him truly or be like him. This is why in Ephesians 5:1-2 we are told, "Therefore, be imitators of God as dear children, and walk in love, as Christ also has loved us, and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma." Imitation is not a bad thing, like Socrates states. It is rather a way of understanding, a way of learning. Such is myth, a way of perceiving God in our finite and imperfect terms. Myth, fiction, faith are needed to comprehend many things of God. Socrates' opinion of myth differs drastically from its real truth. Socrates' opinion is that myth or epic is imitation, far from the truth but appearing to be the truth, deceptive. He believes that the censorship of myth is the appropriate way of dealing with myth. Although Socrates may be right in saying that myth can be deceiving if it is not taken correctly, and that myth is not pure truth, he is ultimately wrong in censoring myth. This has been shown in these ways. First of all, myth is based on truth, and therefore myth contains goodness. Secondly, myth can communicate things in such a way as can never be said through fact. And thirdly, Jesus used myth in his teaching so that men could relate to him, who relate to the truth, thinking independently to find it themselves. As well, myth is a reflection and perhaps the only way of understanding what can be understood of God. Through these points, it is clear that myth is the only way of conveying fact, in a way that is relative to the listener, and a method that demands the hearer's thought to come into their own conclusion. When Socrates says that myth is imitation, he is absolutely right. It is, and there is no way of getting around it. However, he fails to see that without myth, a large portion of what we know about God and the world would be unclear and possibly never discovered. This is why it is ultimately wrong to censor myth from the world.
You just slightly under 13 minutes.
Alright.
13 minutes.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So,